Great hammers are one of the most brutal weapons in Elden Ring, and today I ranked, reviewed, and put each one into a tier list for your enjoyment. Stay tuned for the end where I give my thoughts on the class as a whole. Let's get into it. The Smithscript Greathammer is a newcomer to the Greathammer class and one of the most unique and cool weapons in the Greathammer class. It requires 11 faith and intelligence, 20 strength, and 10 dexterity. Your best bet is to use it with a strength build because it has an A scaling in that, and if you're building around this weapon, leave the other stats at their base requirements because you don't really get anything out of those scalings. It shares the basic Greathammer moveset for its light attack, but a very cool heavy attack, and that the weapon is actually a throw. What makes all of the new Smithscript weapons so fun with this is that they don't use any FP and it's not a unique skill, it's just your heavy attack. But is it any good? Honestly, just like the rest of the Smithscript weapons, it can be a little underwhelming because that throwing damage really doesn't do much even with the Smithing Talisman. The Smithing Talisman will increase the throwing damage, but even then it's not really worth it because think about how you're also taking away from a talisman slot, and it really doesn't do enough damage to really justify that either. But really, that heavy attack is also more of a detriment than a positive. Greathammers are the best weapon in the game at breaking stance, and the best way to do that quickly is to use charge heavy attacks. But with the Smithscript Greathammer, you're getting a throw, you're taking that ability away, and even more annoying for me personally at least, was just throwing off my muscle memory. I've played since the release of Dark Souls 3, and I'm so used to having a heavy attack where the weapon stays in my hand and I can quickly recover. But with this, I'm in a throwing animation and then don't have it for a second. It just felt awkward and was also, more importantly, just leaving me open to a lot more attacks. It's not all bad though because it actually has a very impressive AR. I mentioned earlier it's best on a strength build, and on those it comes in 4th among Greathammers if you're using an optimized build. There are particular enemies you could also use it to great success on, particularly dragons where you can throw the Greathammer right at its head. It again doesn't deal the damage you would think, but it still kind of keeps it in front of you, which makes it a little more fun than just attacking its leg over and over again. But you do need them to be sitting a little still just because again it doesn't have tracking. And really, I just found it so much fun. The idea of this channel is supposed to be about the vibes and not the meta, so in a tier list I'm not going to place it that highly in practical ability, but I just want you guys to know if you like this weapon or think it's cool, definitely go for it. You can make almost anything viable in PvE. To get the most out of it, I use the Stone Barbed Cracked here to really increase the light attack stance damage because you just break stance so frequently with Greathammers. I figured I'd lean into that and just make the most of the light attacks, and then the throwing attack I would use sparingly. Again, not the most optimal setup, but I found it extremely fun and it's something I really enjoyed, so I will be coming back to it. But in terms of actual performance, I am going to be placing it in the C tier, unfortunately. The large club and curved club are weapons without really much to them. Like I said, I'm going to give a huge rundown of the class and my final thoughts at the end, but the most disappointing thing about this class is there really aren't any unique movesets. Almost all of them felt unique enough in their own way, but the curved club and the great club don't come with any gimmicks and they're as straightforward as it gets. You're never going to believe this, but they actually scale best in strength. So they have solid AR and range, and that's the kind of build you're going for. You're going to two-hand it. The curved club has more damage, and the large club has a lot more range. I do think it's pretty even overall though, and it comes down to preference between which you want to use, more range or more damage. And overall, there's really just not much to it. Really, what's wrong with simplicity though? This is for the primal caveman in us all. Why do you need a blacksmith making you a fancy engraved sword when you can pick up a big ass log and kill the gods yourself? This is truly bonk personified. These bad boys I'm gonna put in the B tier. They're in the same spot. The order really doesn't matter. If you want more damage, take the curved club, and if you want more range, take the great club. The brick hammer is a barbarian's best friend. It's just a brick on top of a stick. It's just the club but with an extra step, but more damage too. The brick hammer has really poor range though. I mentioned in my curved greatsword tier list video that I think range is really important in PvE. This is a PvE list, by the way. PvP, we all know that you really want to outspace and use range against your opponent, But even against bosses and normal enemies, range really does play a part, and the brick hammer sacrifices a lot of it for its damage. But that damage really can get insane. It's one of the few weapons that can scale all the way to S in strength, and you're really gonna feel it. There's just so much weight behind the brick hammer. And for most weapons, that really wouldn't be as important to me as the range. Again, going back to the other example, in the curved greatsword video, I took the dismounter over the omen cleaver. But this is a case where the brick hammer just does so much more damage that I would take it over the weapons that are longer and have better range. It reaches all the way in S, and you don't need any dexterity levels, so if you're really trying to just go all in on strength, I think it's a great option. It's not a weapon I see in co-op much at all, and I don't see it really mentioned, but I ended up placing it ahead of the clubs, but still in B tier for that tremendous damage. The poor range really just doesn't make it new player friendly, but I think a lot of people should give this one a go, because I do think it's better, I just don't think it's for everyone. Now this is where it's going to start to get really interesting. The Great Mace is fantastic. It combines all of the best elements of the clubs and the brick hammer into one package of brutal blunt force trauma. In an optimized build, its damage is only slightly behind the brick hammer and only slightly behind the clubs in range. But even when it comes in second place in the respective categories, it's not really by a lot. You're really just combining two weapons' strengths without their downsides and turning it into one really dominant weapon. When I see the word Greathammer, this is always the first one that comes to mind. If you want your best all-arounder among the standard weapons, this really is the choice for Greathammers. While it really is disappointing all of these do share the same moveset, I really think each one can play into different kinds of players. If you throw caution to the wind and want to get right in the enemy's face, you take the brick hammer, and if you want some kind of range, take the clubs. But if you want both, the Great Mace is going to be your go-to, and it's our first entry into the A tier. It's so close to the S tier, but I really can't justify it just because of the weapons that are ahead of it. The Devourer's Scepter is wielded by Knight Burnhall of the Recusants of Volcano Manor. I honestly don't think people understand how much of an absolute beast this guy is. Knight Burnhall is possibly the most powerful Tarnished to ever live besides the player character. He actually reached the Forge of the Giants, but his maiden died in the process of trying to burn the Erdtree and didn't succeed either. It was a cruel twist of fate, and in his despair, he joined the Volcano Manor and started hunting other Tarnished. Square Table Gaming has a pretty cool video on it. I'd highly recommend it. Tell them I sent you because I love their stuff. The most interesting part for me though is that he was able to do this with wielding the worst weapon I've ever fucking seen. I truly hate this thing. I couldn't use it on bosses. It doesn't get hyper armor, it does no damage at all practically, and it heals you based on how many enemies it hits. In case you didn't know, most of the time there's one boss, sometimes there's two, and almost never three. It's a stat-hungry weapon, and it needs 24 strength, 20 dex, and 25 faith, yet they all scale in C. I don't understand why they did this, why they would do my boy Recusant Burnhall like this, and for these reasons, we're placing it in a brand new tier that we started in this video called the Monk's Flame Blade, a tier reserved only for the truly just worst weapons in Elden Ring, which the Devourer's Scepter, as of now, will be their president. The Beastclaw Greathammer is pretty scary looking. Those black nails are said to represent Sarash, the Lord of Beasts. Sarash is the lion you see on Godfrey's back during our fight with him. His purpose is to hold back Godfrey and his rage and keep him calm so that he would behave himself as a lord and not a WWE wrestler while he's an Elden Lord. Godfrey really is a Chad and one of the biggest in the Lands Between. I never see anyone using this though, and I get why. You get it from Garank, the Beast Clergyman, after giving him 7 Death Root. That can be a bit annoying, especially when the other rewards from Garank aren't really anything special. I'll even admit, I forgot it existed, and was very relieved to find I had one on my original character. It requires 20 strength, 10 dex, and 18 faith. Its skill is Regal Beast Claws, which has you slam the weapon into the ground and a shockwave go in 5 directions, doing pretty decent damage. It's a ton of fun to use on random mobs, and on bosses, it's definitely viable. While using every Greathammer, this was the biggest revelation for me. Initially, I forgot it existed. So because of this, I figured it was going to be pretty bad, but it's actually pretty solid. I'm not going to pretend it's the best by any means, but this is definitely pretty good and it's just a blast to use. If you're looking for a great weapon that can carry you through the game, definitely look somewhere else. But if, for example, you return to Elden Ring for Shadow of the Erdtree and are sick of your meta build, give the Beastclaw a try. It's a lot of fun. Its practicality, it's a low B, maybe high C, but definitely worth a look. The Pickaxe is a very funny weapon. In a recent video, I ranked my top 20 infusible weapons. Before I did the video, I was asking for people's input, and someone told me I left out the Rusted Anchor, and I thought they were joking, but after using it, they were absolutely right. The Pickaxe is similar because at first glance, you'd think it's a meme weapon, but it's really not. It's actually very, very good. You can find it in any cave or tunnel by the enemies wielding it, and it's not meant for combat, right? But our Lord and Savior Miyazaki, he works in mysterious ways. The Pickaxe slaps. It is the only Greathammer that has pierce damage. On every single attack it does this too. That's really, really great, because a lot of enemies and bosses are weak to pierce damage. And you do get counterattacks, which are extra damage if you attack an enemy while they're in their attack frames. So essentially, it is the only Greathammer that can do that. Thrust is a plus. Its range is on the lowered side. I really did notice that, but the damage is very good. Pairing it with the Spear Talisman and staying aggressive, those counterattacks that are unique to the pierce damages are really going to add up, because enemies in Elden Ring never stop attacking, right? So you'd be surprised how many times that thing procs. And for all these reasons, I'm going to place it in the A tier. The Celebrant Skull is found in Altus Plateau, north of the Windmill Village, and thankfully it's the only Celebrant weapon that doesn't really need to be farmed, which is one of the worst aspects about the Celebrant's weapons, but that's really where the positives end, because this weapon is very, very bad. Its damage is trash, and from what I could tell, it was the lowest among Greathammers on almost every infusion. To make matters worse, it is one of the lowest ranges among Greathammers. This is not really a recipe for success if you couldn't tell. It has one unique ability that's completely worthless, and that it gives you runes each time you hit an enemy. It's not enough to ever matter, even when rune farming, so please don't bother. Despite its unique ability, it can still be infused. It has the lowest weight and requirements to use, so maybe there's something wacky you can do with it that's fun, but I don't really see it for now. If you guys have found anything, just let me know, but for now, it's going to go in the C tier because I just don't get it. Now, the Greathorn Hammer is pretty cool looking, and it also has unique ability in that every kill you get 3% of your health back. So when I saw that ability, I don't think that's really great. Like, Between Sight of Grace is sure, but the hardest part about these games is the bosses. But after using it for a little bit, it actually was pretty good. It's not somber, so it can still be infused. That bonus effect is just that, a bonus effect. You're not really sacrificing anything. Among the Greathammers, it's in the middle of the pack in range and damage. There's really nothing special about it, and that is kind of a missed opportunity to me. Because of that horn, I wish they used something like that in its moveset, or maybe gave it some pierce damage on one of its attack. There's just a lot they could have done with it, because as I've said a few times, stay tuned for the end of the video where I review the class as a whole, but they really just all have the same moveset, so I think this one was in particular a missed opportunity. But all in all, it wasn't terrible. I'd say it was just completely average, so I'll put it in the B tier. Looks cool too, not bad. I really didn't like the battle hammers, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that these things look really sick, just really, really awesome, and it's disappointing to see that they are so bad, because I knew going into it the reach was going to be very poor. What I didn't know is that it was going to be even worse than most normal hammers. Now on top of that, the damage just doesn't make up for that at all, and I couldn't even proc the Scarlet Rot that much. I don't know if it's bugged or what. I tried both of them. This clip is just a normal one. I'm really grinding for these videos, guys, so if you do like it and you appreciate me using dog shit weapons like the Battle Hammer, please give me a like for the algorithm. It would mean a lot. And if you want to subscribe for more videos like this, I plan on doing the halberds. People voted on that one next. I'd love for you to stick around, and if you don't want to, that's all good. Just hope you're enjoying the video. Now let's go on to some good weapons and just throw these in the C tier and call it a day. The Envoy's Longhorn was once the most secretly overpowered weapon in Elden Ring. Its skill, Bubble Shower, would send all these holy bubbles into enemies. Bubbles probably wouldn't do that much damage though, right? Well, it definitely doesn't now, but as recent as just a few months ago, if you used it against a large enemy, you beat Elden Ring. It would delete large enemies' boss health pools if every bubble hit, and just break their stance almost instantly. People were killing Placiduous stacks and other similar enemies, and just trivializing a lot of the fights against those bigger beast-type enemies. So, FromSoft caught on eventually and nerfed this thing into the ground. Don't be sad because it's over, be happy because it happened. But yeah, D-tier, this thing sucks now. It kind of goes hand in hand right now with the Cranial Vessel Candlestand hand, which henceforth I'm going to be calling this the Candlestand, which is pretty disturbing because if you look at it, it's got a fire prelate's head on it. At the very least, it's a depiction of it. And this is kind of the same thing. It used to be not as good as the Envoy's Longhorn, but they did nerf these. It does fire damage, but it's even harder to land. You have to be like directly underneath it. These really just aren't worth using anymore because of the nerfs. And this one in particular is very stat hungry. It uses 26 strength and 22 faith, and it grades out at B fully upgraded, but it's really just not worth it, especially because you find at the very end of the game in Mountaintop of the Giants. Yeah, a lot of these weapons can be grouped up into doing some of the same things, and these two, they're really just not great, and they're going to go in the D tier. The Great Stars is sensational. It is the cream of the crop of great hammers. Just like every other great hammer, it does work great on a strength build coming in at A, but with this one, you could use it on almost any build really. But the first thing that sets it apart from any other great hammer is that it has bleed. There are very few, if any, bad bleed weapons in Elden Ring, and this is the only great hammer that comes with it. Pair it with the Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman for an increase in damage of 20%. If you don't respect yourself, you can also use the White Mask. It doesn't stop there though, because it also has Lifesteal. The earlier entry, the Greathorn, restores 3% damage on a kill, but this monstrosity restores 1% every hit. A common strategy is to combine it with the Prelate's Charge to trigger that health regen and the bleed as quickly as possible. You can find 2 of these in the game, and they're both at Altus Plateau, which isn't too deep into Elden Ring, especially now that we're accounting for a whole DLC. So if you're playing an honest build, meaning you're not going to trade or take items for anyone, you will be able to power stance on your very first playthrough. This weapon really doesn't have any weaknesses. You can say its damage is low, but the bleed more than makes up for it. The Great Stars is without a doubt a top weapon in Elden Ring, and for now it's going to sit by itself in the S tier.
Oh dear. Another dogged contender.
The Black Steel Greathammer is just phenomenal. Stay tuned afterwards because we are going to give a final grade to the Greathammer class, but the Black Steel Greathammer is just amazing. In my recent video, I praised it as a great weapon, but the comments pointed out I really didn't do it justice, and I asked my Discord, which will be in the pinned comment by the way, and they essentially said you guys were right and I'm a fucking idiot. The Black Steel Greathammer is found at the very beginning of the DLC and requires 25 strength, 17 faith, and 11 dexterity. On an optimized build, its AR couldn't really be touched to the point it really might actually be outdamaged to Great Stars. And so because this Great Stars has its lifesteal ability, that would make them just about even in the grand scheme of things, correct? Well, no, because the Black Steel Greathammer has a unique ability. When you successfully guard counter, you get the added effect of throwing a wave of holy damage back at the enemy. It then explodes, dealing holy damage that scales with faith. If you combine this with the Deflect hard tier, you're going to become an unstoppable juggernaut against anything in the game. The play here is to then combine it with the Deflect tier so that you really aren't taking damage as long as you can get those guard counters off and just keep increasing your damage. And then on top of that, it can still be infused. And then, to add the Holy Shrouded Crack tier for that added damage on the Holy Wave guard counter abilities, and even tie that in with the Sacred Blade Ash of War. When you use the Sacred Blade Ash of War, you get a passive weapon buff. It lasts a little bit and it'll add holy damage to your weapon, and it just synergizes perfectly, and you're going to be doing downright silly damage at that point. Guard counters are amazing, but they take getting used to. A lot of people, me included, don't use them, and even if you never use a single guard counter, the damage in the Black Steel Greathammer would place it firmly in the S tier along with the Great Stars, but when you add on its special ability and synergizing buffs, it sits in the S plus tier, which is reserved only for the best weapons in Elden Ring. We do in fact have a new king of Great Hammers. So the Great Hammer has a very fast moveset, and it does the highest stance damage in the game. You combine these two things together and the Great Hammers really are just a very, very solid class. Now the problem is that these individual options were all a little lacking. So when you look at the Great Stars versus something like the clubs, there's really no point in picking the clubs other than vibes, which is a perfectly fine reason. That's what you should be doing. But in terms of the meta, it's open and shut case that it's the Great Stars and the Black Steel Greathammer. While the variety is lacking, I do really love this weapon class, and I'm really glad you guys chose it. So our final grade is going to be an 8 out of 10. It's not going to stack up with things like the Great Swords because of its variety being so lacking, but if you guys want to check out some Colossal Swords or Curved Great Swords, they'll be to the top left and right. Love you guys, see you in the next one.